As you may well know, Stanley Kubrick's film The Shining was an adaptation film from Stephen King's 1977 horror fiction novel of the same name. This film is highly regarded as one of the best horror films, and films of all time. Both audiences and critics love it. However, there is one person who failed to see Kubrick's vision in its work. Stephen King hates this adaptation of The Shining. He believes it lacks substance and that the story is rushed. He's quoted saying, "I think The Shining is a beautiful film and looks terrific, but it's a big, beautiful Cadillac with no engine inside of it. I kept my mouth shut at the time of release, but I didn't care for it much." And so, 17 years later, he decided if you want something done right, you have to do it yourself. He penned the screenplay for the 3-part series of a truer adaptation, and him, alongside director Mick Garris, brought the ambitious project to fruition. Stephen King is one of the most famous authors of our time, with over 30 film adaptations of his books. It's unlikely one, especially a remake of possibly the one that put him on the map, would fall into such obscurity. So why does no one seem to remember the 1997 miniseries, or not know about it to begin with? There was too much love for the original 1980 film. While upon release reviews were mixed, in the 17 years that passed, it had become a staple of cinema and iconic as its own entity due to its diversions from the book. The miniseries was determined to stand alone from the 1980 film. Director Mick Garris has made it clear that his goal was to faithfully adapt Stephen King's novel, not upstage Kubrick. In his podcast, Post Mortem with Mick Garris, he reflects on the process of making the series, saying, "My thought process was, let's make the best adaptation of this cinematic book as possible," and that King's script was the best script he'd ever read. He did mention his failure to recognize the challenge that lay ahead due to the success of Kubrick's prior entry, stating, "It was met with great naivety. I never stopped to think that the first film was so iconic that there would be a lot of resistance to this." And he only stated to have doubts when casting began, as every actor he went to play Jack Torrance turned it down. With the incentive to stay as close to the novel as possible and his total faith in King's script, the series was unrecognizable from the 1980 film audiences and critics grew to love. While this series is more accurate to the book, it failed to win over critics who loved the original's artistic take it was so known for. With its immersive set design and thematic camera work, Michael Blowen of the Boston Globe said, "It was small in its artistic ambitions," and Manuel Mendoza of the Dallas Morning News simply noted, "It was neither visually nor narratively compelling." Others agreed 4.5 hours of airtime was not warranted. Mike Duffy of the Detroit Free Press calls it its fatal flaw, and that it's just too darn long. While Hal Bodecker of the Orlando Sentinel says, "The running time unwisely inflates the intimate story. The extreme length leads to tiresome repetition. Horror and suspense are better in small helpings." This series' more literal approach to the adaptation left a poor taste in the mouth of critics. Another reason this may not be as well known is due to its relatively smaller scale release. While Kubrick's film was released in theaters, Stephen King's The Shining aired 3 nights on ABC, with an estimated 19 million viewers on the first night and an 18 million on the second and third. It was not initially released on home video as per an agreement with ABC and Kubrick, and the 3 parts were scarcely reran, granting this version ultimately zero rewatchability at the time, while its predecessor did not have that problem. Even today, this film is hardly traceable, streaming on no sites in the US and only legally available on DVD for a staggering $22.99, whereas Kubrick's version is streaming for free and for rent on many platforms, and is available on DVD for as little as $3. With no way to watch it again, people moved on to the next thing and left Stephen King's Shining in the dust. Elaine Rapping touches on this in her article, Made for TV Movies, The Domestication of Social Issues. She believes television is primarily a business. It delivers audiences to sponsors whose real need is to have viewers see their commercials, not the programs between them, and that it is regulated by the FCC in ways which require it to air a certain amount of public interest material, such as news and documentaries, and to present a balanced view of political issues. TV, which combines these 3 functions, is experienced very differently from theatrical film. We don't watch a show so much as we experience a flow of images and functions as we sit before a TV set. All of this is presented in a uniform style so that it is sometimes difficult to distinguish between fiction and non-fiction on TV. It is hard to tell actors from commercial salesmen or even from real people. Her pointing out the lack of immersion audiences felt with television as opposed to movies is one of the key reasons Stephen King's The Shining didn't stick. Audiences were watching more passively at home than they were in the theater, waiting for the commercial breaks to use the bathroom or ordering a pizza, having all the lights on in their home and their phone ringing in the next room, or getting so invested in a scene just for it to be cut off short by a Honda commercial. As she points out, television is not the ideal medium for stories like this to be presented upon first watch, which helped to this series' forgettability. Stephen King's The Shining was a passion project created by possibly the book's biggest fans, and while they poured everything they could into this adaptation, due to the miniseries' small scale and commercialized release, lack of artistic vision, unprecedented length, and the original film's mainstay as a cult classic, King and Garris's attempt was doomed from the start to fall by the wayside. When it comes to The Shining, audiences, critics, and the test of time have all crowned Kubrick's adaptation as the dominant one.